to the Standing Committee on Official Languages. This is our meeting number 72, and today is Tuesday, March 19, 2013. We are here pursuant to Standing Orders 110 and 111 to review the certificate of nomination of Mr. Graham Fraser to the position of Commissioner of Official Languages, referred to the committee on Wednesday, March 6, 2013. Appearing before us, we have Mr. Fraser. Welcome. Mr. Fraser, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for considering the certificate of nomination extending my term as Commissioner of Official Languages. The past 6 years have been marked by important events, including regular meetings with members of this committee. I hope that I will have the privilege of continuing this relationship for another 3 years. Je tiens à souligner le dévouement et le professionnalisme.
I would like to underscore the commitment and professionalism shown by the senior management employees at the Office of the Commissioner during the past few years. You have no doubt gotten to know some of the members of my executive committee who regularly accompany me to our meetings.
It's like our first meeting in 2006, the purpose of which was to consider my application for the position of Commissioner. Some of you will no doubt remember that on that occasion, I repeated the question posed by the Laurendeau-Dunton Commission 50 years ago this year. Les Canadiens anglais, les Canadiens français.
Can English-speaking and French-speaking Canadians live together, and do they want to do so? If the answer to this question is still yes, then a result-based official language policy must be implemented. This is what I said to you 6 years ago, and I still believe it to be true.
And take actions that will allow Canadians to obtain services in both official languages, allow public servants to work in the official language of their choice, allow official language communities to fully contribute to Canadian society, allow people in every part of the country to learn Canada's 2 official languages. On me juge également par les risques.
I'm also judged by the results I obtain as a deputy head. Canadians who file complaints expect effective resolution within a reasonable time frame. Our interventions with federal institutions must be judicious and lead to lasting changes.
Communities and bilingualism promotion groups count on our support. Our promotional campaigns must reach their target audience. Moreover, the organization must be well managed and must ensure respect for employees and citizens who fund the organization. Le commissariat continuera.
The Office of the Commissioner will continue to modernize itself. We are moving ahead with the implementation of new information management systems that will allow Canadians to file a complaint online. And we are now present on social media such as Facebook and Twitter.
Process that's used to handle more than 60% of the complaints we received. Moreover, we will soon be under the same roof as Elections Canada, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, and the Office of the Information Commissioner. This proximity to other agents of Parliament will strengthen our independence and eventually allow us to share some services. Ces changements administratifs permettront.
These administrative changes will allow the Office of the Commissioner to tackle upcoming challenges more effectively. I'm thinking not only about the program that I hope will replace the Roadmap for Linguistic Duality, but also about the many upcoming important anniversaries and events during which Canada's linguistic duality will play a starring role.
The organizers of the 2013 Canada Games in Sherbrooke. They are also already cooperating with the organizers of the 2015 Pan American Games in Toronto. This is to ensure that we apply the lessons learned during the 2010 Olympic Games in Vancouver. Les célébrations qui entourent le 150.
Celebrations in 2017 for the 150th anniversary of Confederation will include the inauguration of the new Canadian Museum of History and will be preceded by many commemorative events, for example, for both World Wars and for the 200th anniversary of the birth of John A. Macdonald. These anniversaries serve as the backdrop for a national conversation about our common history and our values.
Historic moments, while recognizing that they were, at the time, a source of bitter and polarizing debate. It would be counterproductive to try to mask the disagreements because we still feel the after effects today. Depuis son élection, le gouvernement du Parti
Since it was elected, the Parti Québécois government has been concerned about forces that are endangering the status of French. These dangers are very real. In the scientific, international trade, and entertainment communities, the dominance of English often reduces the space that Francophones have to express themselves. But these dangers do not come from Quebec's English-speaking communities or from federal institutions. This is a message that I will continue to spread.
Work of the Office of the Commissioner and the federal government must do over the next few years. Also on the agenda are the following: the vitality of official language communities, issues related to immigration, which is the past, the present, and the future of our country, access to justice in both official languages, the critical need to improve access to French language learning. We also need to keep an eye on the changes within the federal public service, both in terms of services and in terms of language of work and support for official language communities. Le Commissariat abordera.
The Office of the Commissioner will examine these issues as part of four main priorities. 1. Promote linguistic duality in Canadian society, specifically by encouraging the government to play a more visible role in and improve access to second language learning. 2. Ensure that language rights are protected, specifically by monitoring the impact of budget cuts and the use of 2011 census data to determine the language designation of federal offices while continuing to monitor federal institution performance.
Community vitality, particularly with respect to immigration. 4th, ensure sound management at the Office of the Commissioner during a period of change. To meet these objectives, the Office of the Commissioner will continue to use every tool at its disposal. The work it does with parliamentarians, studies, audits, investigations, meetings with the heads of institutions, promotion and information initiatives, and, of course, legal remedies. Nous continuerons également notre.
We will also continue our work with federal institutions and linguistic minorities and majorities while providing advice in the areas of health and education, the private sector, and the media as needed. With your permission, I will continue to be a cheerleader and an egg. Thank you for your attention, and I would now like to take the remaining time to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, Mr. Fraser. We have an hour and a half for questions and comments, and we'll begin with Mr. Godet. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to begin with a notice of motion that the committee invite the President and Director General of the Translation Bureau for Public Works and Government Services Canada, Mrs. Donna Asimov, for a televised meeting and a public meeting 2 hours in length by June 14th, 2013. Mr. Godet, the floor is yours to discuss your notice of motion. Mr. Graham, I'd like to wish you good day. It's not normal now, and given the current context, for the Prime Minister to appoint the same person to the position. If we do decide to appoint you. No, my colleague, Jennifer Stoddard, did get a 3-year extension as well. There are other parliamentary officers who have had this privilege. Do you intend to come back a second time, or what? If your nomination is approved, what will your priorities be over the next 3 years? Your priorities. As I mentioned several of them in my opening statement. Obviously, we have a priority to ensure that the changes and the transformations that are occurring in the government as a result of budget cuts, we're going to look at the way these things are being implemented. We're also going to deal with the big events that are coming up, such as the Pan Am Games. There are also the commemorative events to underscore historic events. I think that's a priority for our office. You know, there have been some budget reductions in various departments. the government has bragged that the Office of the Commissioner has not had any budget reductions. But you're trying to implement some technological changes in your office. I think that cost about $6.2 million. You appeared before this committee and you said that this would have an impact on the office's work. Do you feel that it has had an impact, yes or no? I think that we have managed to absorb the cost thanks to the professionalism of our managers. We have managed to make our complaint processing process more efficient. It now takes 7.3 months. We've actually cut the time for processing complaints in half, and we have gone from 11 months to 5.9 months for resolution of these complaints. So we're becoming more efficient with the help of this new technology. Let's talk about examples. When a complaint was filed about the Saint-Jean Military College, by the time that the complaint was dealt with, the place had shut down. The recruiting center in Bathurst, this is very important. This is a bilingual recruiting center where people from Madawaska come. I filed my complaint in April 2012, and now we're March 19th, 2013, and a decision has not yet been rendered. So the danger is that given the time that elapses before a complaint is processed, the government has already shut down the offices. And then I recall when they wanted to shut down the Bathurst office and bring it to Miramichi, you had said that the government had not consulted you and that this was a violation of the law. I think that is the Bathurst office going to be shut down? We know what the answer is. Francophones in Madawaska will have to go to Fredericton. And that's just one complaint. When I look at all the complaints that I get in my office, there are many of them, and this has taken over a year to resolve. I can't comment on the details on that particular complaint. That's one of the basic rules of my office or my role. I have noted this. I have noted the examples that you have given. But indeed, the rule that I live under is that I can't comment on anything. I'm not asking you to comment on the complaint. I'm saying it takes time, and by the time the decision's made, the office has been shut down. It's too late. Can you? How many times have you caused the government to overturn its decision? Is that within your power? Can you comment on that? Yes, it's in my power to answer that. With Air Canada, for instance, we participated as an intervener in the case of the government versus FCSA when it came to linguistic obligations. And we created the support program. Now, you heard I tabled a notice of motion earlier to have the PDG of the Translation Bureau appear. We hear about cutbacks to translation when we talk about figures. It's gone from 12,000, a staff of 12,000. Well, all this to say that a lot of positions have been limited. And now people are being told they have to draft their documents in English now. Everyone received a letter stating that there are going to be layoffs. So have you started to investigate this? Have you had any direct complaints on this? We haven't initiated a formal investigation, but I've already had conversations with Mrs. Ashimov. I have a meeting, as was pointed out in the newspaper, and I have a meeting with with the president of the union to take a look at the situation. And I find this quite worrisome. Without confirming anything whatsoever, but I did read the newspaper article this morning, and we're in a situation now where there's a lot of pressure being exerted. Often the pressure is not spoken, but the pressure is felt by the Francophone employees who feel that they can avail themselves of services in their own language, and sometimes it's just nonverbal gesturing in an office. A supervisor perhaps may never use French in a meeting. It could be a political attaché who calls, who answers the phone in one language only, and feels that he or she has no need to say anything in the other language. And in some departments, the very culture of the department is one where English is predominant. And Francophones are very reluctant. They're reluctant to use French at work, to prepare reports in French. And I would like to underscore the value of leadership. This holds true for managers, executives, the entire public service, not only to tolerate the use of the other language, but to actively promote the use of both official languages and to encourage Francophones to use French at work. Thank you, Mr. Fraser. Mr. Galipeau. Mr. Chair, if I understand correctly, the official opposition is in agreement with the government's decision to renew Mr. Fraser's appointment. Is that a question for Mr. Fraser? There was a great reporter who 6 or 7 years ago wrote a book called Sorry I Don't Speak French. And this book came out and said explain the vision of your vision of linguistic duality in the country. You were a professional news reporter. Now you are the commissioner. And I presume you have greater access to the reality of our linguistic duality. I'd be interested in knowing how your vision has changed. I can tell you that in Orleans, the only people who used to be bilingual were Francophones. And now there are more Anglophones who speak French in French than there are than the opposite. But I don't want to get away from the main issue here. Often I go back to the conclusion of this book to see whether or not my ideas have changed, but they remain the same. I continue to convey the same ideas. Sometimes I feel like I'm promoting my book I've been promoting my book for 6 years. And you still haven't sold out yet? If I had to rewrite the book, I would say, or I would try rather, I would say that the documents that I used, the books that I quoted from, was before the shutdown of the Royal Saint-Jean Military College, and I think that the closure of this military college had a very negative impact. When was that? That was in 1995. But where I'm more optimistic than I was in the book is that linguistic duality, I believe, has more allies within the public service than I had initially witnessed when I was doing research.
Over the past 6 years, I've seen that when there's a change in leadership within departments, or if there's any sort of bad, say, performance report, often a new minister has come in and has decided to make improvements, has decided to find a solution and has set out an action plan, and then that's when we see some progress. There may be a deputy minister, for example, or a head of an agency who comes in and has the will to change the culture within that organization and to encourage greater respect. And I also learned something else, quite happily, and that is that there is a vitality amongst minority official language communities, and they vary throughout the country.
One of the least important parliamentarians on this Hill, but in 3 years I'd like you to get a new mandate as a Commissioner of Official Languages, but let's assume you don't. What would you see as your legacy after 9 years?
My hope would be that we will have had a series of achievements that are publicly acknowledged and recognized, in which the presence of both official languages in Canada's public space is such that all Canadians, even those who are not bilingual, have grown to have a sense of that the other language belongs to them, even if they do not speak it. And I had an experience recently talking to a former Conservative member of Parliament who told me that he had watched the Olympics with friends in Toronto, and the room watching the opening ceremonies were surprised at how little French there was in the opening ceremonies. And he observed that 20 years earlier, those same people would have been surprised if there had been equal treatment of English and French in a public event. And so I think that what we are now seeing is a gradual evolution in which people are taking for granted that national events need to have the presence of both English and French in order to be fully recognized as national events.
You'll be surprised to know, last Wednesday I was at the airport here in Ottawa to welcome the French Prime Minister, and of course all kinds of French diplomats and bureaucrats were there waiting in the Billy Bishop room. But I was at the same time the Pope was getting elected at the Vatican, so all TVs were on CNN. I had to fight to get them on RDI, and of course nobody knew how the TV worked. So in the end it worked. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci, Monsieur Galipeau.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dion. Well, you know, that's not very funny. It's a problem that one encounters everywhere, throughout all the hotels in Canada. Yes, I realize that, and I did something about it. Yes, and you were right to do that. Mr. Fraser, one of the interesting things about the committee is that we get to meet you every so often and to have a bit of a debate. I was really pleased with your first mandate, and I support you in your second mandate. I do have one criticism, though. I think that you have succeeded in reestablishing some confidence, but I think that's been at the expense of some clarity, I think. I was looking at the list of priorities that you have. They're fine. They're perfectly good. However, let's look at the numbers. Statistics Canada has given these numbers more than you have. You'd say it's their work, but I would like to see them in your report. And if you want to be able to support promotion of the linguistic duality within Canadian society, then you have to look at the numbers, and the numbers are these. Let's look at the numbers and not the percentages. I mean, there's so many Canadians who come from everywhere, all around the world. So one can't just look at percentages, but let's look at numbers. Why is it that in a country like Canada, over the past 4 years, we've gone from over 2 million people outside Quebec who are able to have a conversation in French, and that's gone down from 2.561 to 2.584. That's a 20%. 20%. That's very worrying. Now, we're counting on young people for the future. So let's look at young people in Quebec and outside Quebec. There are many young people in Quebec who are bilingual because they just sort of catch English. So registration has gone up by 23% in French immersion, but young people in French programs has gone down by 23%. That's Statistics Canada. And what that means in the end is that Canadians who are learning French as a second language outside Quebec, as a percentage, has gone from 53 to 44% in 20 years. So we have a problem. And the Commissioner has to figure out what that problem is. I'll stop here because I want to give you time to reply. So it's all very well to give confidence to people, but what you also have to do is present the challenges. You have to show people what those challenges are. You have to do it loud and clear, and you have, especially clearly. Thank you very much for your comments. In fact, one of the greatest challenges that I see is the ongoing learning as a second language in Canada. The immersion programs are now being acknowledged as having been a great success. However, there are people who are dropping out of the program, and the dropout levels are very high and worrisome. There are school boards who continue to restrict access to immersion programs, and there are people who still wait overnight, actually, in wait lines to be able to get a spot for their kids in British Columbia, for example. And I think that that's very worrisome within the school system. I even heard of counselors who have suggested to children, guidance counselors, that they withdraw from immersion programs so that they can get better marks, because universities just look at marks. There was a student in French immersion who told me that her teacher told her not to write the exam in the immersion program, but to actually write the core French exam because she'd get much higher marks. And that's all that universities are interested in. And I think what that does is push people to be mediocre, actually. One of the studies that we undertook and that I continue to talk about is that the universities have to point out that it's very important to learn French and that they're going to place a value on students who have undergone a program that is more difficult and more challenging and demanding. So it's extremely important that they send out that message to the schools and that they also provide opportunities for learning French as a second language at the university level. Because the Government of Canada, who is the biggest employer in Canada, needs bilingual staff. So that is a message that I have tried to communicate in all provinces that I've visited, and I visit universities as well. That's where I also try and get that message out. And I speak at the federal level. I speak to them about the importance of recruiting within universities. And I also have meetings in high schools where I also try and get that message out because I think it's extremely important. Thank you. Will there be a second round of questions? Yes. All right, then I'll raise the budget issues in the second round of questions. But you understand what I was trying to say. What I'm saying is that you have to provide that confidence. I think you've been very good at that. But what I'm expecting over the next 3 years is that you keep that excellent standard and that you try and pinpoint what the major problems are, what the trends are, and that you call upon the government to find solutions to those problems. And reports do that. You have 4 priorities that you outlined. I don't necessarily have time to read them out, but they're perfectly good priorities. So what you want to do then is point out where you're at the beginning of the year and where you want to end up at the end of the year. Well, then I think that you'll find it quite interesting to read the annual report that we are drafting and that will be tabled in the House in October, because what that does is give you a picture of what we have observed, what we did observe during our first mandate, where we saw progress, where we saw failures, and where the challenges lie. Then I will read it very closely, and I hope my own comments will help you in the drafting of it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Trottier. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Fraser, for coming before the committee today. I'd just like to share with the committee what the reasoning was behind an extension of 3 years. Perhaps you could do that. Could you tell us why? Well, perhaps what I should say first is this. I did not request an extension of my mandate. But when I was asked about it, when I was asked whether or not I was interested, I said that if I was asked, then I would accept, and I was the one who suggested an extension of 3 years. And my reasoning behind that was this. 1 year is much too short. 2 years would land me right in the middle of the 2015 elections. And so if I were to accept an extension, I thought perhaps 3 years would be appropriate. And I would say that there are other positions are sometimes have a mandate of 5 years or 10 years, and some are renewed for 5 years. But as I said to the member for Acadie-Bathurst, my colleague Jennifer Stoddart had, for example, a 7-year mandate, and hers was renewed for 3 years. The Auditor General has a 10-year mandate, so perhaps going from 7 to 10 was logical as well, in terms of my own position. Well, I certainly don't think you're a lame duck. You've done very, very good work, and so I'm glad you'll be open to another extension. Now, 2 issues that I'm interested in are immigration and education. How do you think you can act within the sphere of immigration? What is lacking? And what do you think the government can do in terms of official languages in the sphere of immigration? I think there's a general consensus within official language communities, minority communities, that immigration really is where their future lies. In these communities throughout the country, there is an incredible diversity. And there are people in those communities who come from the Maghreb, who come from France. And I think it's very important to have support programs to assist those individuals in their integration into the community. Now, often immigrants have those facilities to help them integrate into Anglophone communities, but there are less of those services for Francophones. There are some, but the example that I was struck by was this. There's the Organisation Accueil Francophone in Winnipeg, which is a branch of the Franco-Manitoban Association, and It literally welcomes immigrants and refugees at the airport itself and then accompanies these people to temporary housing, helps them register their children in French schools. So they are accompanied for a 3-year period. There are various organizations, however, they're not necessarily aware of what the realities are for these minorities, and so they tend to direct immigrants elsewhere, especially if their mother tongue is not English or French. Often their second language, however, is French. For example, people who come from Senegal, well, their mother tongue is Wolof, but they do speak French, not English. And so if these organizations are not aware of that, are not aware of the reality of these communities, then they may end up directing these people naturally towards other host organizations, other Anglophone organizations. I spoke to people in Hamilton, for example, people working in clinics and institutions within these communities, and they told me that they had crossed paths with immigrants who'd only just discovered those institutions, health institutions or clinics, quite late, for a year and a half down the road, and they had told them that if they had known, they would have registered their children in French schools, or they would have registered for a Francophone health clinic. But then they ended up with another doctor in another school, and they were already in their second English year. So it's very important from the outset that these support organizations are aware of the importance of directing Francophone immigrants or immigrants who speak French as another language to the appropriate places. So that should be considered as their first official language, and therefore they should be directed towards these institutions. Thank you. You spoke to health services, and you do have a relationship with the provinces. Your office has that relationship. Could you talk to us about that relationship with the provincial ministries responsible for example, education or health services? Well, there are two issues. I have met with ministers, often premiers, in the provinces, and I've participated in meetings with various civil servants or officials who are responsible for Francophone affairs, and these are present in all provinces. So what we've done is exchange information, for example, and what I was struck by was that even if these are very small communities, there is still quite an impressive commitment on the part of the provincial government to provide an office that is responsible for relations with these minority communities. For example, in Newfoundland and Prince Edward Island, there's an assistant deputy minister who reports to the premier, and he is responsible for their action plan and for reviewing their services that are offered in French. So we have perfectly friendly relations with the provinces. Obviously, I don't have any investigative powers. But the federal government also has a role in the health networks that are funded under the roadmap. And in that case, I have direct contact with various organizations, community organizations that are funded, for example, by the Community Health Network and others. So there are these health networks that are funded under the roadmap. Thank you.
Mr. Chisu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fraser, to appear in front of our committee. And I would like to ask you very short questions, but pointed. In your opinion, what will be the major challenges and issues facing linguistic duality in the next 3 years?
I think that the challenge will be to ensure that as the federal government goes through a process of cutbacks and restrictions, that institutions continue to recognize and to respect their continuing obligations under the Official Languages Act. That it's not because there's a budget cut that they don't continue to have those obligations.
Another question that I will have, what measures, in your opinion, should be taken in the next few years to ensure the future of Canada linguistic duality, in the way that we are having two issues. One, it is the Canadians who are unilingual in or French or English, and the second, we have yearly 250,000 immigrants coming in this country. So at the end of your mandate in 3 years, that will be close to 750,000 people who not necessarily are bilingual, or the probability that they are bilingual, it is very remote. So in this context, how we are assuring, and we are a country of immigrants, how we are assuring the duality, that we will maintain the dynamic of the duality of the languages in the country?
Well, I think there are a number of things that are important. One that I recommended in my most recent annual report is that the government invest in exchanges for students, so that there be a significant increase in the number of exchanges and opportunities for students to study in their second language. In terms of the arrival of newcomers to Canada, which is something that I welcome, I think that this makes it all the more important that government engage in public education about the history and values of the country. It is one of the reasons why I think that the changes that are happening to the Museum of Civilization, the various anniversaries in which there are plans for celebration, are extremely important as an exercise in public education for Canadians who did not go through the school system and are learning as adults about the history of the country and the values that shape the country.
Okay, and finally, Mr. Commissioner, can you tell me 3 achievements in the 7 years, 3 achievements that you are proud in the 7 years that you have been Commissioner? Or
I was very proud to have been able to participate as an intervener. I'll take it chronologically. Shortly after I arrived, there was the abolition of the Court Challenges Program, and the report that we did on the 118 complaints that we received was the basis before the courts for the court case that resulted in an out-of-court settlement and the creation of the Language Rights Support Program. The fact that the report that we did was the only piece of documentation before the courts that resulted in that out-of-court settlement is something that I'm proud of. I'm also proud that we were able to engage in a constructive way in the planning for the Olympics. And in many ways, the Olympics was a huge success in terms of linguistic duality, with only one failure, and that was the opening ceremonies. And we were able to produce a handbook that is now being used by the organizers of the Canada Games in Sherbrooke and also by the organizers of the Pan American Games. And I'm also, I'm proud of the ongoing work that we've been done in terms of investigations, complaints, and audits, which have had I think a greater impact than is often publicly recognized or realized in helping institutions to realize the problems that exist and leading to the corrections. But I'm also proud of the fact that we've been able to use our study on post-secondary learning opportunities as a continuing evergreen document that I can take across the country and use as a basis for discussion with federal councils, with provincial governments, and with university presidents and department heads about the importance of the continuum of language learning.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Benskin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Fraser, it's always a pleasure to see you. I'd like to talk about ongoing education and official languages. Last week, there was a national congress, and the theme was building an integrated society. There were a lot of round tables on the issue. And at one table, the issue was how to educate people when you're dealing with.
Is it feasible to do a study when we don't have the information? And this is directly in response to the cutting of the long-form census, which gave us a lot of detailed information and helped government target where the support was needed. So sort of continuing the discussion on immigration, without that information, how is your department going to be able to target where support is needed, where there are deficiencies in the integration of immigrants into our society, as well as continuing to be able to watch over how both official languages are faring in minority situations?
That's a very good question, and when the long-form census was done away with, we received complaints, did an investigation. I expressed my great concern about the loss of information that would represent. What became clear in terms of the investigation that we did was that the institution was not at fault, and our investigative powers stop at the cabinet door. As the resignation of Munir Sheikh demonstrated, this was not a decision that was made by a federal institution. It was made by a federal cabinet. Just a word about the Metropolis Conference. I think this is I've attended two of them. Would have attended this one, except I had a previous plan that I had a holiday that was previously booked out of the country, unfortunately, and had planned on had hoped to be back in time. There was an event on the Wednesday night which marked the 50th anniversary of the launch of the Royal Commission on Bilingualism and Biculturalism, and part of the tradition of Metropolis is to consider language issues as part of the pre-conference. So language has certainly been one of the continuing themes of those conferences, and I was sorry to miss that one. Despite that, I think we will continue to be able to monitor the activities of the department. We are going to be doing an audit. It'll be one of the institutions that we will be looking at in detail in the years ahead. And we have certain capacity ourselves to conduct studies and to do investigations, even though obviously the lack of information that would have been there from the long-form census is unfortunate.
Merci pour ça. Puis, juste pour,
Thank you for your answer. And on the same theme, in your opinion, what are the two main challenges that the Anglophone community in a minority situation is dealing with? And the same thing applies for the Francophone community in a minority situation. I believe there are several aspects that are in play with the Anglophone community. For example, there is a general lack of understanding of just how fragile the English community is, particularly those communities that are outside of Montreal Island. There's a tendency amongst most Francophones to view Montreal as the only Anglophone center, and they look at the services that are available for Anglophones in Montreal, and they compare this with the services provided to Francophones in St. Boniface. But if you can draw a comparison and you look at the services provided in the Gaspé, Sherbrooke, and elsewhere, you can see it's better balanced. There's also, after the 2006 census results, it was discovered that even though, objectively speaking, there are Anglophones in Quebec did have institutions and services that were quite significant, the Anglophones were quite pessimistic as to the future. They fear that the Anglophone minority outside of Montreal would, even though there were fewer institutions, fewer services, but those located elsewhere were more optimistic. And I think that can be explained when you look at the path taken by the Anglophone community. If you look at the strength of the economy of the Anglophone community today, and you compare it to the situation 50 years ago, obviously things have changed. But since 82, with the creation of the French schools throughout the country and the school boards throughout the country, health services, there's this feeling in Francophone communities that progress has been achieved. And they're more optimistic than their Anglophone counterparts. There are challenges that they both face, both groups face. Aging is one. There is another challenge of people leaving the rural areas. Youth are leaving rural regions to go to the cities. There's a migration to the cities. But I would say I did note a trend. People do tend to go back to their place of birth once they've retired. Or young people who, let's say, leave the Magdalen Islands or the Gaspé to go and study at university or do their military service. And when they're 30 and they want to start a family, they go back to the Gaspé or to the Magdalen Islands. Now, the Anglophone community in the Magdalen Islands, Kame, there are two executive members who are young women who have a university education, who decided to go back to the islands as financial advisors for the financial institutions there in the islands. So I must confess that this is a bit anecdotal, but this does reflect a visible change that I do see in these communities. Thank you very much. Mr. Galipeau. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I give the floor to the other members, I'd like to do and provide an update on the long census form. The long form was not canceled, and a larger percentage of people filled out the form during the last census.
In the short form.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Galipeau. Mr. O'Toole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et
thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Fraser, for your presentation today. Tell us about your priorities for access to justice in both languages. Jurisdiction, federal government jurisdiction, and federal court versus provincial court.
In that domain of access.
What we have done is we have conducted a study jointly with my provincial colleague in New Brunswick, the Commissioner of Official Languages, and my Ontario colleague, the Commissioner of French Language Services, on the language capacity of federal courts. And we've had a great deal of collaboration from the Chief Justices in the 6 provinces that we've looked at. We have a preliminary draft of that study. I gave an initial look, if you like, or initial presentation to the winter meeting of the Canadian Bar Association in Mont-Tremblant in February, and we will be presenting the final report to the Canadian Bar Association in Saskatoon in August. We are basically looking at what is the process that is used to evaluate the capacity of nominees to the judiciary to be able to conduct a trial in the minority language? What should those criteria be? What is an appropriate level for designation? It's a study that looks at what is the how are the language skills evaluated for those judges who play a critical role, and how does the judiciary evaluate its own linguistic capacity?
Has any consideration been given to within that agenda or that priority area assisting minority language communities in understanding their legal rights either in the criminal or civil process apart from trial? So understanding essentially their legal rights ahead of a court sitting.
That was not part of the study. It is now a few years ago the criminal code was changed so as to ensure that the accused were made aware of their language rights at the very beginning of the process, so that was a positive change in terms of an obligation to make clear to the accused that they have language rights before the courts. I will take under consideration the idea that it's something that it's a promotion campaign that we could consider, but I have to say it's not something that we have considered until now.
My final question stems from your remarks about potential sharing of services between other officers of Parliament, and what is the timeline for that possible, and what scope? Is it administrative? Is it beyond that?
We are the various officers of Parliament, including Elections Canada, Information Privacy, and ourselves, are moving to the same building, 30 Victoria, in Gatineau, and it's. The move is happening on a staged basis, and we are scheduled to make the move in December. That assumes that all the other previous moves have happened. And what we have already looked at is that there will be common reception for all the agents of Parliament, common mailroom, and we are beginning to look at the process of looking at what are the other shared services that that we could engage in? Shared services is one of the messages that we've had loud and clear from Treasury Board and other federal institutions involved in the whole shared service exercise is you should embark on a process, otherwise you will be shared, as it were.
Okay.
And so it is something that we are looking at carefully, but it's the beginning rather than the end of a process at this point.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Lapointe.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to give you a notice of motion on behalf of the colleague that the committee calls before it the Minister responsible for Industry Canada, and that it speak to the language in the workplace in federal jurisdiction on the 8th of March 2013 for a televised session of 2 hours long on the 14th of June 2013. Thank you. Thank you for your notice of motion. Good afternoon, Mr. Fraser. I think I'll follow along the same lines. The report on an NDP bill. No one was informed about the process that was in place at the time. Do you support that way of drafting a report? And do you think it's normal that 135,000 workers not have their language rights protected? And again, do you not feel that we're talking about a law that should be able to protect its workers fully, and we shouldn't just treat them as a client and be satisfied with a certain level of satisfaction? Thank you for the question. I have to admit that I was outside the country when this conference took place, and I was outside the country when the report was tabled. We are currently considering this report. I heard that that was the process that had been adopted. However, I have not had the opportunity to undertake any sort of in-depth analysis, so I would hesitate to comment on or analyze this as to whether or not it's appropriate. I think what is important is the quality of the report, and I am not in a position at this point in time to comment on the quality of the report. So you won't support or not the conclusions of the report today? No, because we have not done a thorough analysis, and I think it's important to know more. I really just did a quick read, but I have not had the opportunity to do any sort of in-depth analysis. All right, then we'll be awaiting your conclusions. My colleague, Mr. Dion, said that sometimes you really look through pink glasses when you're looking at what the situation is. And I have a feeling you're being rather optimistic when I look at what you're saying. In your remarks, you said that the use of English often reduces the space that Francophones have, but that danger does not come from federal institutions necessarily. However, you did state also that the Anglophone culture within departments is so strong that you did have to point out that you can't just tolerate French, you actually have to promote French. So how do you reconcile both statements? That is, that there isn't any fault on the part of the federal jurisdiction or federal government, and yet at the same time that French has to be promoted. No, when I was talking about the English culture of departments, I was talking about the National Capital Region. However, there's an underrepresentation of Anglophones in federal departments in Quebec. And so if one looks at the challenges that Anglophone civil servants are facing in federal departments in Quebec, one can note the same type of problem, except in reverse. In reverse, compared to the situation here in Ottawa. So they hesitate to use English in their meetings because it's the minority language. And they just sort of follow along, whatever the working language is of the group in question. They hesitate to use English when they draft their reports. And so what I have observed is that Anglophones are underrepresented in federal institutions in Quebec. And so it's sort of the opposite of what's happening here in Ottawa. Minister of Official Languages said recently before this committee that there was a decentralization when it came to monitoring the quality of French within departments. What do you think should be in place in order to be able to monitor the quality of services being provided in French when that has all been decentralized? I mean, is everyone in each department supposed to be responsible for ensuring that quality? What kind of measures will be taken in order to monitor the quality of services offered in French? Well, I've already expressed my concern about the fact that there has been a decrease, a significant decrease, in the number of employees in centers of excellence, for example, within Treasury Board. It went down from 56 to 13. And so it becomes more and more difficult then within Treasury Board to ensure that there is a certain level of quality in the use of the French language within departments. There's a general trend, I would say, to hand over responsibility, whether that be language responsibilities or other, to the departments. Now, I have mixed feelings about this. There's the issue of language training. And that is no longer the responsibility of the public service school. That responsibility is now falls on the shoulders of each department. And within those departments, on the shoulders of each manager. So language training is supposed to now be part of the training of each and every employee. Now, on the one hand, one may say that's a positive development, because language training, therefore, is more tailored to the nature of their work, the nature of the work of the department, and the language being used in the department. However, at the same time, it becomes very difficult to monitor the situation. So we are looking at the issue of language training as we speak. Ms. Bateman. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Commissioner, for coming today and for all the work you've done over the past 7 years. 7 years goes by quite quickly. I hope that your appointment is approved and that you will serve another mandate. And as Mr. Dion already said, I don't see this in your biography, in the one prepared by the analyst, but I did hear that you come from Manitoba. No, I have visited Manitoba several times, but I'm from Ottawa. I'm one of the rare beasts here in Ottawa who come from here. I spent my adolescence in Toronto. I undertook my high school studies and university studies in Toronto. I got married in Toronto. My children were born in Toronto. Oh, how unfortunate. As Mr. Dion said, there are immersion programs, And my ability to speak French is thanks to having been able to register 2 children in an immersion program. I'm very proud of what they've done in these immersion programs. And I started learning after they did. Well, congratulations. It looks like you've learned quite a lot. Thank you. As you know, immersion programs are provincial jurisdiction because they're part of education. And there are many programs. And I'd like to know what their impact is on hiring practices within the public service. If we have a bigger pool of young people who have undergone the immersion program. A few years ago, the former secretary of the Treasury Board told me that 40% of new recruits within the public service already were bilingual when they came to the public service. And so I would assume that a large part of these new recruits within the public service are the product of immersion programs. Not all of them necessarily. I myself am not a product of the immersion system. And if I could point out one fault of the success of the immersion program, it's the belief that that's the only way to learn French. And obviously that's not the case. I know many people who are perfectly comfortable in both official languages and who have not participated in any immersion program. They've learned, as I did, later in life. Mr. Fraser, have you observed any decrease in learning costs, for example? For civil servants, for example, within the public service, given this 40%? Because that's a large number of people. That's a large pool. So have you noticed any decrease then in the cost of training? And if not, why haven't we observed a decrease in the cost? Well, one of the disadvantages of this transfer of language training to the departments and a decentralization within the departments down to the managers is that it becomes very difficult to follow the costs of training. Earlier, when there was a school, there was an actual public service school that was responsible for French classes, in STQ, for example, then we knew that there were so and so many teachers, so many students, and there were so many students at such and such a level within the public service and who were on French, as they used to say. And so we knew that an analyst in one department or another was taking a French course. And we knew, but now rather, we know it's very difficult when departments are responsible for that staffing and training to know how much it's costing. Are you saying we don't have that information? Well, I'm told that it's quite difficult actually to get those numbers. I do hope, though, that within the study that we're currently undertaking, we will be able to come up with estimates of those changes in costs with that new approach. I hope so, because if we're talking about 40% who are already bilingual, that's quite different from what it used to be. I'm a little confused by one of your priorities. I absolutely agree that we should promote linguistic duality and that we should encourage vitality and encourage sound management. However, you gave me a very interesting statistic. You said that 40% of the new recruits are already bilingual. If that's the case, then why then are you raising once again the impact of budget cuts? The reality is that this will be spread and you have three other priorities that are not consistent with that comment. Well, for example, if there are institutions that serve communities that are being closed, and if those closures mean that, for example, the network of champions is reduced, and if budget cuts mean that there is less money for translation, and if the general atmosphere changes such that it becomes too costly to actually respect both languages in the workplace, then that is a concern. And Mr. Dion raised that issue. And he raised his reservation in using percentages. What I would say is important. It's not so much the percentage of individuals who have passed their training, it's the actual use of both official languages in the workplace. Thank you. Mr. Ravignan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Fraser, for coming today. I'm a Franco-Ontarian, and I don't necessarily share this positive message that I seem to be getting from you. I'm 40 years old, and many of my generation have become assimilated. I know them. They're my friends. I worked at the Research Council, and research shows that assimilation is a problem amongst Ontarians. Many battles have been fought within the federal government and the place of French within the public service. And there's something you said that I'm concerned about. You seem to be saying that the civil servant is responsible. That is to say that they're not asking that their language be respected. However, they're not necessarily being given the tools. You've spoken to public servants, you've spoken to managers, and there is a culture that you referred to. So what I would like to know is how we can give public servants the tools they need to defend their language and ensure that it's respected by their managers. Well, if I gave you the impression that there are no challenges in terms of the French language, well, then I wasn't clear. I didn't express myself clearly. Because I think I did say that there is a real challenge in the area of research and entertainment, trade, and international exchanges or trade. So those challenges are real. And I hope also that I didn't say that it's the responsibility of public servants, because what is important is leadership. And what I've observed is that when there is a change in leadership, Mr. Fraser, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if there's an absence of leadership, because that actually is the situation, so one can't necessarily just expect leadership to wake up one day. I mean, for years now, bilingualism has existed, and there's still a problem of leadership, lack of leadership within the public service. So I think we need a different approach. I think we need an approach that provides tools and ammunition for civil servants or public servants to ensure that their language and their culture are respected in the workplace. There are tools, and public servants have the right to file complaints with our office, and we undertake investigations under Part 5 of the Act that requires that their right to work in French be respected. We undertake investigations on those issues. And what I have learned is that investigating, auditing an institution in terms of official languages actually has an impact on officials, because senior civil servants are quite competitive and they aren't necessarily open to being criticized by just anyone. I understand, Mr. Fraser.
I know I have limited time here. In June 2012, you tabled your report, and the Privy Council Office was supposed to respond to your report. But now 5 months have elapsed since the deadline, and we haven't yet got a response. At the end of February, we did receive the response from the Privy Council Office. We're in the process of analyzing it, but it did take 5 months after the deadline. Does that worry you at all? Does that worry you, given the attitude that was shown to your report? I'm always dissatisfied, disgruntled when there are delays like that. I did raise this issue with the clerk, and finally we did get a response. We're in the process of analyzing it now, and we will draft a final report. Thank you. Mr. Ravignon, do you have another question? Yes. $3.2 million was provided for the move to the Office of the Official Languages Communications. So this was over and above the 2013 report. But do you expect budget reductions in several sectors? Do you think you'll have adequate resources to ensure that the government does respect what is set out in the Official Languages Act, namely respect of official language communities? I think that we can fulfill our responsibilities with the budget that we have been given. That's all that I can say. But as you said, we did receive money for the move, which is like a loan to some extent. It was given over 5 years. We have to reimburse this amount over a 10-year time. But I do think we did minimize the impact on our daily operations. We have managed to protect our mandate. Thank you. Mr. Galipo? Have we got to the end? Not ready. Do any other government members wish to ask a question? Mr. Godet. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see that Mr. Galipo is concerned. We do support the nomination, just in case you're a little bit worried about this, Mr. Galipo. But our watchdog for official languages, we want you to be a pit bull and not a chihuahua. We want you to be able to really strike hard. That's your responsibility to serve as a watchdog for official languages. It's the responsibility of the commissioner to do this, and that's important, because I don't think the government's results are all that great. We wanted to table a report, but we weren't able to do it. We spent taxpayers' money to produce this report. We did a wonderful study, but we never tabled a report. We visited the far north, Yellowknife, Whitehorse. We met with francophone communities. We wanted to do a study. We did, in fact, do a study, but when time came to do a report and table it in the government, the Conservatives refused to let us do this. And what about the appointment of the Auditor General? A unilingual Anglophone was appointed to the position. What about the Supreme Court? There's that issue as well. So when you look at all of this, when you look at the court challenge program, yes, there was a deal made. I wasn't very happy when I saw that the whole matter was settled out of court. This was a program that led to schools in the regions. It helped communities survive, and we know what's happened now. So the whole story of the long-form census and Statistics Canada, well, there's a lot that could still be said about that. Yes, he says that we didn't take the form away, but we did, in fact, reduce this form. Would you agree with me that we lost data? Thank you. In your opinion, is the office well known to Canadians? Are Canadians sufficiently aware of the fact that they have language rights and that they can file a complaint? Do you have a plan so that you'll be more visible in the future? Two ways to answer that. The Office of the Commissioner is well known amongst minorities, but less well known amongst majorities. We're preparing a promotional program for travelers so that there are posters posted to tell travelers that they do have linguistic rights, that they are entitled to file a complaint if these rights are not respected. There's another aspect that we're developing, and actually it's already underway. That is our presence on the social media with Facebook and Twitter. We're still just getting started, but we did launch ourselves back in September, and this is something that we will continue to assess, namely, how can we better promote our mandate through these means? And I am giving interviews in all of the provinces. I have given speeches in all of the provinces. These are the more conventional ways of promoting an institution, of course, or promoting a law and rights. Earlier, I asked you a question. I had asked you a question about the public service and the number of translators. I have the figures now. 12,300 has gone down to 11,003, gone down by over 1,131. So 103 translators are no longer employed there. So the whole issue of translation is a concern. It's a concern. Are you going to do an investigation, or do you need a formal complaint? I'm not able to give you a formal answer now. I've already planned meetings with people who are involved with this situation. I have a meeting with Mr. Poirier, who is the head of the union. We're going to be looking at this issue. So I don't want to make a decision before I have this meeting. Over the past 12 months, how many times have you met with the Prime Minister? I met him on February 22nd when he asked me to agree to an extension of my mandate. And I met him, I think it was back in September. When I met with ministers and deputy ministers about the recommendations outlined in my report. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fraser. Just to explain one thing, in the annual report, if there are any recommendations that deal with the Prime Minister or any departments, we ask for a meeting to advise them that, we are going to be making a recommendation that's pertinent to you. And there were recommendations And I met with the Prime Minister on 3 occasions to deal with the various recommendations. Thank you. Mr. Dion, last question. Mr. Fraser, I'd like to go to the issue of the budget. Mrs. Bateman's very optimistic, but I don't share her optimism. Are you well equipped to monitor the situation and point out when there are problems? There are a lot of things that worry me. First of all, over the past 4 years, the government has decreased budgets. For community life, it was $200 million. Now it's $50 million now. So, and there were $176 million was for educating the minority groups. And now it's $166 million for linguistic duality. It was $4.4 million. Now it's down to $4.3 million. Learning second language, it was $115 million, and now it's gone down to $112 million. And then there are all of the budget cuts that have been taken effect as well. Don't you think that's bad news? I'm telling you, this is an enormous challenge. When I raised this matter with the minister, he said, well, there's the roadmap money. But I don't know if the roadmap money can be used to compensate for budget cutbacks. It's not supposed to be used for that. It's supposed to be in addition to budget envelopes. And another problem is that when we talk about ministers, who is the minister who's supposed to be responsible for official language? There's no generic minister who's responsible for official languages. So are you going to be able to monitor what's happening with these budget cutbacks? Secondly, what about going beyond the figures? I'll give you an example. The closure of the Search and Rescue Center in Quebec. And now it's going to be transferred to Trenton and Halifax. They're supposed to supervise what's going on in the Gulf area. And I find that you do not really underscore how important bilingualism is in dealing with people. People are dealing with very drastic situations where their lives are at risk, and they need quick answers and in their own language. So in your report, Au-delà des chiffres, beyond figures, you showed a lot of sensitivity. But do you think you're going to be better equipped to monitor the consequences of these budget reductions? That's a very good question. I can tell you that our financial director will be in a budget lockup. She'll be going through all the figures. I have a lot of confidence in the capacity of our analysts. They'll be able to go through the numbers and analyze everything. Is that enough? We'll see. Indeed, I am concerned by the trends that you alluded to. I can also tell you that we heard a lot of concern with people were a lot concerned about federal-provincial agreements that have an impact on the official language minority communities. There's a whole issue of transfer of responsibility, manpower training that's going from Service Canada to British Columbia, where there were some institutions in the community that were left out when this transfer was made. We also heard about the concerns expressed from Anglophone communities in Quebec who fear that the Canada-Quebec agreement will have a negative impact on the health network. And the community learning centers, which all play an important role in 14 different official language minority communities throughout the Quebec territory. If responsibilities for transferring money is given directly to the provinces, the concerns will be heightened. Mr. Lapointe. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to summarize the situation, and you don't need to comment it. I know you're going to study it, but I want to tell you, I just want to tell you how concerned I am about this situation. If someone needs some emergency medication, but they were never, we contacted a center and they were never able to get any answers in English in 4 weeks. And then we were talking about some emergency medication through Health Canada, and when I raised the issue with ministers, I was told, don't make that an issue. So when we talk about decentralizing monitoring of French services, and you talk about studies, and when you look at these types of cases, it really concerns me. How will this study enable us to understand the consequences of decentralization? How can we be reassured? Perhaps decentralization is not necessarily a bad thing, but I can tell you that as an MP, what I'm seeing is most troublesome. I share your concerns. I'm very aware of the incident that you refer to. I think that was absolutely terrible as an experience, and I've noted your concern, and I will consider it in the study that we are going to be undertaking. Thank you for sharing that with me. And your study is going to focus on decentralization. No, it's a study that will focus on language training in the public service. Yes, in the public service. Thank you. If I have 5 minutes, I have other questions I'd like to ask. The Research and Rescue Center. We consulted, my colleague, Mr. Godin, was present at that time, and a former official who's the specialist in this field, he was following this file. He was present at the consultations in Trenton from A to Z, from every stage. He told me something that was very troubling. When he was in Trenton, the candidates that he met needed two skill sets. The person who was going to be there full time, who was going to be replacing the 5 or 6 people who were in Quebec, that's already a sizable loss. One person to replace these 5 or 6 people, that's quite troublesome in itself. But in his opinion, they weren't able to find a candidate who had good knowledge of the river, of the seaway, and had language skills. So the next candidate may not have the knowledge of the seaway at all. So I see that there's a loss, a tremendous loss of service for minority communities, francophones, who need the river for maritime transportation, require knowledge of the river, and somebody who can answer questions to someone who's panicking and who needs help. But you've raised one aspect that is very, very troublesome. And indeed, when I was asked what my priorities were for the next 3 years, one of my main priorities was the impact of government transformation on the services provided in both official languages, whether it be the regionalization of services in the Atlantic provinces or this type of reorganizational change, which will be where it will be more and more difficult to maintain the same level of services. And it has an impact on language competencies as well. And what about the good services provided to the community? Do you understand what I'm getting at? It's not about whether someone speaks perfectly good English or French, but what about people with skills in the other area? You need someone. There is a language problem here. It's first and foremost a language problem. Do you understand what I'm getting at? No, I understand what you're getting at, and I've noted this, and we will indeed give some thought to this matter. This particular aspect of the decision-making process, I will call on your bulldog abilities. Thank you.
Mr. Galipeau. Is that it? Mr. Galipeau has something to say. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Fraser, for appearing before us today. I've listened to everyone's questions on both sides of the table. And I assume that I'd like rather to give my word to the chairman that I'm sure some of these comments will remain anonymous. And now, I'll give the floor to Mr. Godin. Yes, you investigated the search and rescue. That was the only, that search center in Trenton, that was the only bilingual center. The government is implying there will be one person per shift who will be bilingual, and that reports will have to be drafted in English because their supervisors do not understand French, and that runs counter to Part 5 of the Official Languages Act. Will you follow up on that before that change is made, before the centre moves, in order to ensure that if ever there is a move, and I hope that it won't be moved, but to ensure that that will not happen, because we have to ensure the safety of people at sea. We wanted to do a study within this committee, but the committee didn't do it, but we did our own study. But it's your responsibility to study this, and there has to be a follow-up. And I want to know if the government will come back to you then with a plan of action, not necessarily a plan of action, but just to respond to what you raise as a commissioner. Well, I think it's very important in cases like this to follow up on those recommendations in order to ensure that we know what the outcome is. So we're talking about rescue at sea, their lives in danger, and that's not when you start learning a language. The people who go there have to be bilingual, and they have to comply with Part 5. They should be able to draft their reports in the language of their choice, and they should be able to speak the language of their choice. So we shouldn't have to wait for 3 or 4 years for that to happen. Mr. Fraser and Mr. Chairman, I would like the appointment of Mr. Fraser to the position of Commissioner of Official Languages be approved, and that we report to the House.
Commissioner of Official Language be concurred in, and that the chair report to the House.
Merci, Monsieur Godin.
Thank you, Mr. Godin. Debate? Is there any debate on the motion?
Opposed? The motion is adopted. Without further ado, Mr. Fraser, thank you very much for your testimony and for congratulations on the extension of your term. We wish you, as a committee, all the best as you embark on the next 3 years. We look forward to seeing you many more times here in the future.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this very much. Merci beaucoup.
The meeting is adjourned.